In 2016, a reporter asked Scott Bryce about the 2 years that made him famous. He didn't talk about the Emmy nominations. He didn't talk about the ratings, or the fan mail, or the fact that, for a while there, half of America stopped what it was doing at 2 o'clock in the afternoon to watch him on As the World Turns. He said this instead: "The Meg days. We were all kids. We didn't know what we were doing." The Meg was Meg Ryan. Before When Harry Met Sally. Before she was the most beloved actress in America. She was 20 years old, he was 24, and they were two kids on a soundstage in New York City, on the set of As the World Turns, who had no idea that what they were making would outlive them both. On July 12, 2026, Scott Bryce died. He was 68 years old, and by the end of this video, you're going to understand why a man who spent 40 years in front of a camera, who worked with Dick Wolf, who stood on a Broadway stage at 19, chose to be remembered for something so small that most people never even noticed he was doing it. To understand Scott Bryce, you have to understand the house he grew up in. He was born Scott McAllister Bryce on January 6, 1958, in New York City, and his father was Ed Bryce, a name that, if you were watching television in the 1960s and 70s, you knew without knowing you knew it. Ed Bryce played Bill Bauer on Guiding Light. Not for a season, not for a few years. From 1959 to 1983, nearly a quarter of a century as one of daytime's foundational characters, on a show that had already made the leap from radio and would go on to run for 72 years. Guiding Light, like As the World Turns, was a Procter & Gamble production, the company that, for most of the 20th century, was essentially the patron saint of American daytime drama. So Scott didn't discover the soap opera, he was raised inside it. He grew up understanding, in the way that only the children of working actors understand, that this was a job, that you showed up, that there were pages, and there were marks, and there were people counting on you to know both. That upbringing shows up in everything he did afterward. But we'll come back to it, because it's the key to the whole man. He didn't coast in on the family name. In 1977, at 19 years old, Scott Bryce made his Broadway debut in Caesar and Cleopatra, George Bernard Shaw, on a real New York stage, in a real production. That's not nepotism, that's a kid who could actually do it. And then, in 1982, CBS called, As the World Turns had been on the air since 1956. Created by Erna Phillips, the woman who essentially invented the American soap opera as a form, it was the show that had defined the medium, set in the fictional town of Oakdale, Illinois, and watched with something close to devotion by millions of American families. Helen Wagner and Don Hastings had been part of its fabric for decades, and they had a part for him. The part was Craig Montgomery. Now, if you never watched, here's what you need to know about Craig Montgomery. He was the one you weren't supposed to like. Charming, calculating, ambitious, and just self-aware enough to be dangerous. He schemed, he manipulated, he wanted things he had no right to want, and went after them anyway. And audiences absolutely could not look away. Part of that was the writing. Most of it was Scott Bryce. Because the trick with a character like Craig, the thing that separates the actors who can do it from the ones who can't, is that you have to make the audience understand him even while he's doing something unforgivable. You have to let them see the wound underneath the ambition. Bryce could do that with his eyes, in a two-shot, in the 4 seconds before a commercial break. They paired him with a 20-year-old actress named Meg Ryan. She was playing Betsy Stewart, and what happened next became one of the defining storylines of 1980s daytime television. Craig wanted Betsy. Betsy was with Steve, played by Frank Runyon. And that triangle, Craig, Betsy, Steve, took hold of the American afternoon and did not let go. People planned around it. People taped it on VCRs when they had to work. In an era before streaming, before the internet, before you could catch up on anything, missing an episode meant hearing about it from your sister on the phone that night. Meg Ryan would leave that soundstage and become Meg Ryan, Top Gun, When Harry Met Sally, Sleepless in Seattle. One of the biggest movie stars on earth, but before any of it, she was Betsy, and he was Craig, and they were, in his own words, kids who didn't know what they were doing. Here's what's remarkable about that quote. He gave it in 2016, more than 30 years after the fact. He'd had a whole career by then, dozens of credits, primetime work, a life, and when a reporter from Soap Opera Digest brought up the most famous chapter of his professional life, he didn't puff it up. He didn't claim more than he'd earned. He said they were kids. He said they didn't know what they were doing. And then, in that same conversation, he gave the credit away. He said it was Elizabeth Hubbard, the great actress who played Lucinda Walsh, who taught him more about the medium than anyone. That's not false modesty. That's a man who was raised by a working actor and knew exactly what the work was worth and exactly what it wasn't. The industry disagreed with his modesty, for the record. In 1986 and again in 1987, Scott Bryce was nominated for the Daytime Emmy Award for Outstanding Lead Actor in a Drama Series, back-to-back, for a character who, on paper, was a villain. He played Craig Montgomery from 1982 into the early 1990s. Then he came back in 1993, then he left again. Then he came back once more in 2007. All told, across 3 separate stints spanning 26 years, around 280 episodes of As the World Turns. Other actors played Craig. Hunt Block played him, and did it well enough that a whole generation of viewers has 2 Craigs living in their memory. Jeffrey Meek played him. John Lindstrom played him after Bryce left for the last time in 2008. Lindstrom, who soap fans also know from General Hospital, bringing his own considerable weight to the role. But ask anyone who watched, and there's only one Craig. And this is the part of the story that most people never see, the part that isn't glamorous, and is, I'd argue, the more impressive half of his life. Because after Oakdale, Scott Bryce did something a lot of soap actors can't do. He built a real, durable, 35-year career as a working television actor. He was on The Facts of Life. He was on The Golden Girls, Who's the Boss, L.A. Law, The Commish. He had a recurring role on Murphy Brown as the husband of Faith Ford's Corky Sherwood. Faith Ford, who brought Corky to life for 11 seasons and made that role her own. From 1999 to 2001, he was a series regular on Ryan Murphy's popular Murphy, who would go on to create Glee, American Horror Story, and American Crime Story, but whose first major television series was this sharp, underrated show about high school hierarchies. Bryce played Mike McQueen, Brooke's father, and the engagement that forced 2 girls who couldn't stand each other to share a house. 43 episodes, every single one of them. He turned up on Chicago PD, on The Blacklist, on Blue Bloods, on Homeland, on 30 Rock. He did a stint on One Life to Live in 2006 as Dr. Ed Crosby. He played a senator in Beacon Hill, a web series in 2014, back when nobody was quite sure what a web series even was, which, in retrospect, puts him at the frontier of a format that would reshape television entirely. And on Law & Order, he played a man named Nathan Alpert, on and off, from 1997 all the way to 2024. Read that again. 27 years. The same actor, the same universe, across 3 decades, more than 60 credits. 60. That is not a star's career. That is a craftsman's career. And it turns out that's exactly how he saw it. In 2025, Scott Bryce was diagnosed with stage 3 esophageal and stomach cancer. He didn't hide it. That's worth sitting with for a second, because he didn't have to tell anyone. He was 67 years old. He'd been in the business his entire adult life. He could have gone quiet, taken his treatment, and let the work speak. Nobody would have blamed him. Instead, he talked about it publicly. And the thing he wanted people to hear, the thing he kept coming back to, was early detection. He knew what the American Cancer Society and cancer researchers have been saying for years, that the cancers most likely to kill you are the ones nobody catches in time. Esophageal and stomach cancers are difficult diseases, and part of what makes them so difficult is how easily they hide. They don't announce themselves. The early symptoms are the kind of thing you shrug off: a little trouble swallowing, some heartburn, a bit of weight you didn't mean to lose. And unlike some cancers, there's no routine screening for the average person, so they're often found late when the options have narrowed. Scott Bryce knew that, and he used what he had: a recognizable face and a platform he'd spent 40 years earning, to say it out loud to people who might otherwise have shrugged it off. He went through treatment. In September of 2025, he sat down and talked about the whole thing publicly, and afterward, he told people he was on the mend. He believed it. His friends believed it. For a while, the story was going the way you want these stories to go, and then the cancer came back. His son Jackson would later explain what happened with a clarity that is almost unbearable to read. What started in the esophagus spread, and it became brain tumors. Jackson watched it. He was 19 years old, and he watched his father go through radiation, and chemotherapy, and immunotherapy, and pain, and he described what he saw with a kind of steadiness that tells you exactly what kind of man raised him. He said his father faced all of it with pride and courage, and an unshakable belief that somehow everything would work out and he would win. He didn't win. But that's not the same thing as losing. On the evening of Sunday, July 12, 2026, Scott Bryce died. He was 68. The news didn't come from a studio. It didn't come from a publicist, or a press release, or a network statement. It came from a friend, Lucy Arnaz, the daughter of Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz, who had worked alongside Bryce and loved him for decades, posted it on her own Facebook page in the raw hours right after it happened. She called him a wonderful actor, a beautiful man, and a terrific husband and father. She wrote about the things she was going to miss: his eyes, his smile, his wit, his laugh, his bravery, his hugs, and then she spoke directly to his family, to his wife, Jodi, and to his son, Jackson, and told them he was watching over them now and would always be their guide. She said she hated these goodbyes. She told him to rest in peace, and she called him marvelous. She took the post down not long after. It was too personal, and it had gone everywhere, and grief is not a press release. But it had already done what it needed to do. It had told the truth about him before anyone had time to make it tidy. Jackson posted his own tribute on Instagram. He said his father was part of everything he'd ever done, and everything he ever would do. He said he was endlessly grateful that God chose that man to be his father, and that he was proud to be his son. Finn Carter, who played Sierra Esteban, and whose romance with Craig was, for a lot of longtime viewers, the truest thing on that show, wrote that her sadness knew no bounds. And 3 days earlier, on July 9th, the daytime world had already lost Randolph Mantooth. Emergency made him a star, but soap fans knew him from General Hospital, from Loving, and from As the World Turns. Two men from the same fictional world, gone inside of a single week. Oakdale is emptier tonight than it was a week ago. He is survived by his wife, Jodi Stevens, and their son, Jackson. At the start of this, I told you there was a reason a man with 40 years of work behind him chose to be remembered for something almost nobody noticed. Here it is. Jackson said that when people asked his father what he wanted to be remembered for, Bryce gave the same answer. He said he was a one-take actor. 2 takes, max. That's it. That's the whole epitaph. And if you don't work in television, that might sound like a strange thing to want on your headstone. But understand what he was actually saying. He was saying, I knew my lines, I hit my marks, I came prepared every day for 40 years, and I never once made 100 people stand around in the cold waiting on me. His son said that when he worked for Dick Wolf, the directors used to schedule him at the end of the day because they knew he wouldn't take long. That is the highest compliment a working actor can receive, and almost nobody outside the industry would ever recognize it as one. That's the man. That's Ed Bryce's son. Raised inside the work, respectful of the work, right to the end. He was Craig Montgomery. He was the villain you couldn't stop watching. He was the 24-year-old kid opposite a 20-year-old Meg Ryan, both of them, in his words, with no idea what they were doing, and somehow making something that people still remember more than 40 years later. He was a husband to Jodi. He was a father to Jackson, and when it came for him, he faced it the way his son said he faced it, with pride, and with courage, and with an unshakable belief that it would all work out. Bryce, 1958 to 2026. He was a one-take actor, 2 takes, max. If Craig Montgomery was part of your afternoons, if you were one of the millions who stopped for Oakdale, tell us in the comments what you remember. Not about the death, about him, about the show. That's what keeps him here. And if you'd like to stay with us as we remember the people who made those years what they were, subscribe. We'll keep telling their stories properly. Thank you for watching.